Hey, and welcome to ThinqTanq, where our diverse leaders tackle your diverse challenges. Today, we're looking about how to create a safe space for discussions around race and racism in your workplace. I'm your host, Ray P. Ferrer, CEO of Ray Coach, and I ask you to join me in welcoming today's ThinqTankers.
Hi, I am Robin Ingram, Assistant Vice President for School of Medicine Alumni Relations and Engagement at the Fund for Johns Hopkins Medicine. And when the COVID pandemic is over, I look forward to traveling to Europe. I want to go to Paris, I want to go to Greece, I want to explore cultures and eat lots of good food.
Hi everybody, I'm Elida Bautista. I'm the Interim Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley. And I think first on my list is probably just visiting friends domestically in Chicago and New York. And I would love to travel to Madagascar.
Welcome both.
Hello everybody, my name is Damon Packwood. I am the creator and executive director of Gameheads out of Oakland, California, and when the COVID crisis is over with, I am going back to Kauai, and I'm hopefully going to stay there.
Open up an arm of the organization in Kauai, David.
Yes.
And I didn't get to share where I'm going to go. When this is all over, I am straight like a shot to Ireland, where we are overdue to create our Ireland and Europe-based office. So that office is sitting there waiting for us, and when this is over, I'm going there. Today we have a challenge sent in from a leader here in the U.S., where each of us is right now. Dear ThinqTanq, I work in HR in my organization, and I've been here a couple of years. I'm still considered new because people tend to stay here for many years. I am African American, and since George Floyd's murder early last year, a lot of my colleagues of color are pulling me aside to share concerns and stories that they don't feel safe discussing with white colleagues or with HR in a formal way. How do I help my company launch safe space conversations or other safe spaces so folks can talk freely without fear of making career-limiting public statements or inviting backlash? Signed, Safety First. Folks, this one's multi-layered, and there are many issues involved in the letter. So I'm curious to know who wants to have at this first.
My first reaction was to say to this person that, you are in a privileged space, but a difficult space too. Privileged and I think honored because your colleagues trust you enough to come to you with this, but difficult and heavy of having the weight of having to deal with your own emotions and reactions, but also thinking about how do you influence change in your organization. And I think there are so many of us that are dealing with those same emotions, and it's a roller coaster, and it's heavy. And you have, I know I have a weight of feeling the need to do something, thinking about those who've gone before me and what they've done, and just kind of figuring out how do you crack this hard puzzle to really make a change. But take some solace in knowing that you're a trusted person. And I think that's very important to honor that and respect that and look at that as a responsibility and a privilege.
Thanks, Robin. A lot of thoughts coming from the one issue, right? So much is embedded in this. Damon, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this one was a tough one because, I agree that, there is some degree of, you should acknowledge that people do trust you and they're coming to you because they do. And that's can be a burden and it can be very stressful. In my experience, when people feel this way, at a company or at an organization, it means that there's a cultural issue, right? And that's not going to change overnight. And that's where things become kind of dicey. The first thing that comes to mind is I would encourage that person not to try to take on this problem by themselves. They really need to kind of bring in sort of outside counsel. And when I say outside counsel, I don't mean like lawyers, but like, there are organizations that do a really fantastic job of things like this. And I would definitely start reaching out to thought leaders about, how do you create sort of, cultural change or create spaces for people to talk about these sorts of things. But I think that first and foremost is your employees of color are expressing an issue, and you want to start there, right? So you want to start by getting them together and giving them an opportunity to express themselves. I think that should be the priority. I think that's what I've seen, particularly in the video game industry. It's extremely toxic in the video game industry the last couple of years, and so they're kind of learning this the hard way. And one thing that I've seen people do, especially when they have D&I folks, so that would be another question: do they have a D&I director? And if they don't, then what's the process of bringing that person on? But then also, like, once you have a D&I person, there's like two things that they tend to focus on. There's like external D&I and an internal D&I, right? So external D&I is like, how are we connected to communities of color or organizations that serve communities of color? So we actually engage a lot of like volunteers from affinity groups in companies, right? Because they want to be engaged in the community, or they want to be around people that look like them. So that's one. But then internal D&I, which is far more complicated and different per company, but kind of like acknowledging the diversity of the company and creating, events that sort of, acknowledge people's like diverse perspectives and things like that. I mean, that can get very, very complicated. But this is an extremely, I shudder to it's a really difficult question to answer in a small soundbite. I'll say that much.
Yeah. This is this is the kind of thing that we could actually keep talking about, and we probably will after we stop recording. Elida, this conversation speaks to the specific area where you and I have spent many professional years, not together, but separately, in the field of diversity and inclusion and belonging, right? So what are your thoughts as you listen to all this?
It's interesting because initially I understood it to be like folks are coming to this person in HR about their personal struggles that they wouldn't share with their white colleagues. So it's interesting that my reflection, and I think was probably rooted in my own personal experience of having a lot of folks tell me about, kind of pretty tragic family things that might be going on with them that overlap with this, right? With like the George Floyd murder, that they wouldn't tell white colleagues, in part, I think, out of this fear of perpetuating stereotypes or wanting to keep a level of perception of professionalism, right? And so there's that part around how do you actually create belonging to such an extent that that folks could feel free to have these conversations with their managers about accommodations they might need to go to a funeral in their family, or another thing, without being seen as like, oh, there goes Elida again with another family struggle, right? Mm-hmm. But the way that Damon and Robin responded to it, I would say that I've had that experience as well, right? Where I'm, at an organization and suddenly everybody's coming to me informally, even if it's not part of my purview, because I have this title, and it's like, hey, FYI, here's all these things that are going on in terms of people feeling like they're being overlooked for promotions or not being valued, or all of these reverberations, right? And to Damon's point, it can be really tricky when somebody overtly or externally makes some kind of bold statement about their commitment to diversity, but their employees aren't feeling that they're being taken care of or appreciated. And so how do you move beyond the celebrations and the real efforts around recruitment and representation to the true feeling of belonging and valuing the employees you do have, so that you have higher retention rates and different kind of engagement and contributions by those folks, right? So I think culture change, we have to acknowledge, takes a long time.
Yep.
I would enlist as many folks to voluntarily support each other, and while simultaneously advocating to get some formal positions in there, as Damon was saying, But I have found that sometimes there are a lot of folks who have additional talents, like somebody might have had a yoga instruction background, and somebody else might have been certified in some kind of diversity thing, but their role here is fundraising, right? And how do you bring in those other talents to create a community that mobilizes, that also advocates for getting some kind of diversity officer, or supporting learning of their peers in a more formal way that might open up these conversations. At Haas, the students do a series called Ask Me Anything, and the staff have now adapted that, where folks might volunteer to offer a panel to answer any questions in that particular concrete space. They're like, anything you want to know about X identity, and they open themselves up to their colleagues to have that conversation.
Thank you. So chock full. Everybody's input here is chock full. One thing that I'm observing as I listen to all this is a realization many of us have had for a few years, which is, when you hear people say people of color have to do twice the work of their white colleagues, this is the second 100%. Like, this is precisely the work that majority group people or people, who are in the power position don't have to do. You don't have to think about, am I going to represent well? Do I have to, if people are coming to me, must I encourage that, even though that's not in my job description? My role here is fundraising, but now I'm adjunct diversity person forever, right? So
Yeah, I was thinking about that. There has to be a level of frustration, of why am I doing this? Why am I responsible? And yes, I started out by saying, yes, it's a privilege, and you have to do something, but there's also, why am I doing this? Why has it taken so long for people to be awakened and start doing all of these things? So I think that frustration is probably definitely there. And yet, once again, we're doing something that someone else should be doing. And I'm going back to part of the original question too, which was, how do you create this safe space? And I was even thinking of finding 3 models that are happening either in other companies or other organizations that you can take back to your team to say, this is what we need to do. And these are 3 effective models, so that those examples are there. And you can kind of see what it looks like and hear how it's been successful, will also help drive the story of how do you actually create this safe space.
One other thing I would add, go ahead.
Sorry, just one thing quick, Ellie, that I just want to say, and those examples are known and are they don't have to be brand new, So in diversity and inclusion work, which has been going on for many decades, there are many examples of this going well and yielding great results. So it doesn't have to be something that happened within the last 6 to 12 months. It can be something that happened a little further back too, because we've known how to do this well for a really long time. Sorry, back to you, Olivia.
No, one thing I was thinking is this person is in an HR role, and without violating anybody's confidentiality, can go to some of the leadership and just say, I'm getting a lot of feedback. How about a climate survey, right? So then you have concrete data about the experiences, and that can be divvied up by certain identities, so that as a company, you can get a sense of what is the climate, what is the experience, if there's enough numbers there for safety, right? Or asking to what extent you can share some of these more anonymized ways, vignettes with leadership to convey the urgency of what is happening behind the scenes.
Thanks. Everybody's talking about the things this individual HR leader can do for themselves. We're also talking about actions that their colleagues in HR can do and colleagues across the leadership structure can do. So this is really, leaders must own much of this. They can be informed by other people, but leaders must own these efforts, I would say, as my opinion. Thank each of you for your input, and I'm thinking about a conversation in closing. I'm just thinking about a conversation from an organization that wanted to hire my firm to come in and create safe spaces around race for them. And they were a US based firm with locations all over. And they didn't want it to get political. And they didn't want it, and these are the words they used, they didn't want it to get political, and they didn't want it to make anybody feel bad. So if you're talking about race, you're talking about racism. And racism, people feel bad because of racism. So it's impossible for everybody to feel enlightened and better after every conversation where we're talking about racism, right? So I just want to name, creating safe spaces means you also are unearthing things that are difficult. And for a culture to survive and thrive, we have to be able to look under rocks and look at things that are difficult and not say everybody's the same and it doesn't matter, right? So racism is what we're talking about, and white supremacy specifically is what we're often talking about in conversations around race. So just get ready, because if you want to do that work, it means that you have to be ready for deeper work, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And having some norms around that, right? Including expecting that you're not going to have closure at the end of a conversation, that you're not, it's not going to be solved in the next 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months, right? Like this, you know, like I said, 500 years in the making, you know, you have to have some patience about how long it's going to take to actually make those cultural shifts.
And speaking of ending without closure, that's all the time we have for this think tank, which we had too much to talk about in one session. We honor the power, the honor, and the responsibility people are giving you when you are hearing these difficult times that your team members are going through. Make sure that we pay attention to the representation anxiety that people are bringing. They don't want to be seen as stereotypical or problematic at the same time that these experiences are real for them. We know that safe spaces can be helpful. We know that bringing in expertise, whether from internal or external sources, is important when it comes to dealing with these challenges. Remember, though, that this takes time. It's not going to be solved in one intervention or one program. Be in it for the long haul. All right, y'all, that's the time we have for today. Thank you for your input. Thank you, Think Tankers, for all your great thoughts. And if you have a challenge you want the Think Tank to have at, send it to me, ray@raycoach.com, and we'll go to it. All right, take care, Guiding Say, go with love.